It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, "By George, I think he's got it." Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome to another podcast by George. Well, today we're at the John Stoddard Cancer Center, not too far, right off downtown Des Moines, and we're visiting with Dr. Andrew Nish. This is going to be fun. Stand by for this. He's practiced interventional radiology for 28 years and has subsequently gone on to do a fellowship in integrative medicine to the University of Arizona. Dr. Nish is the medical director of the John Stoddard Cancer Center, and he has an in-depth knowledge of how nutrition and lifestyle choices influence health and aging. But what's going to be fun, what we're talking about today, is this mind-body connection. And I recently saw him speak at Above and Beyond Cancer. They've got a presentation once weekly, and I was there, and I was just blown away by it. I just thought it was fantastic. And I got to thinking on the drive over here, I mean, the good doctor probably gets frustrated with people like me, because I've been running around now for some time telling people, you know, I think just about everything we are is in our DNA. It's genetics. And the way I tell it to people is I came to this conclusion because I go to the racetrack and these guys are betting their entire life's fortune on the genetics of a horse. And yet when it comes to a person, they kind of tend to ignore it. They don't put enough validity in the fact that we are this genome and that we're basically our parents just rebirthed or whatever. So I go see Dr. Nish, and Dr. Nish, I'm thinking I'm kind of wrong about that. I think my premise is a little off base. What do you think?
Oh, George, that's just typical of where we are in human history right now. We're enamored with the genome because we can study it. We can take it apart. We can look at it and we can say, oh, you're at risk for X, Y, or Z. But as you know from listening to the Above and Beyond presentation, It's not all about genetics, because it's about gene expression, and it's about how the environment changes gene expression.
I remember you started off, and it got a laugh or two from the gallery there, but the gut is all important. You said to start with, your bowel movement this morning may be more important to your health than you think.
That's an interesting thing, and we're learning more and more we have about 10 trillion cells in our body. There's 100 trillion bacteria in our gut, and they are enormously important in our health. So there's a symbiotic relationship. We're dependent on them. They're dependent on us. And it really is, if you look back at Ayurvedic medicine, which is ancient Eastern Indian medicine that's been around for 5,000 years, the most important organ system in that system of medicine is the gut. Yeah. Everything centers around the gut. And it may be true, because if you look at our immune system, 80% of our immune system is the gut. Our gut is what's most exposed to the environment. So we have this huge long tube coated by these cells called epithelium, and that's what interacts with our environment. So anything you put in your mouth, anything you swallow, has an effect on your gut, which then in turn has an effect on our bacteria, which then in turn has an effect on our health and what genes might be expressed and what genes might not be expressed.
And the crap we're putting in our guts these days, I mean, it's just terrible. Some people will look at it and say, yeah, but we're living longer, but you've got a theory about that also.
But we aren't living longer. We've lost 1/10 of a year life expectancy the last 2 years.
No.
So we were living longer, but the millennial generation may be the first generation in decades to actually live less long than their parents.
Well, we're not doing too good. But yeah, and the other thing I can't get away from now, this guy's really smart, folks. I got to tell you now, he didn't waste his youth like me, drinking beer and chasing girls up and down the street. And this guy was going to school and learning some valuable things. But the thing that you talked about I'm just a dummy in the weeds here, kind of looking out. And I've always wondered about this. You talk about the molecular structure, the human cell. I've always looked at it and I thought, well, wait a minute. The universe is round and it goes around. The earth is round and it goes around. And I look at the cell structure and how it works. And you put that up on the overhead and I'm looking at that and God, that thing looks like the Milky Way to me. Do you think there's is that just a coincidence, or do you think there's any existential connection between the smallest thing that we can measure and its appearance and the largest thing that we can measure, which is the great void beyond?
Absolutely. And maybe the universe isn't round, because remember, the universe is still expanding very, very rapidly. But that's an interesting point. I guess I've never really contemplated that.
Only me.
Let's think about it.
Yeah.
Science over time changes. Several hundred years ago, everybody thought the earth was flat. Now we know the earth is round. Several hundred years ago, we didn't know cell structure. Now we know cell structure. And what are we going to know, or what are we going to discard 100 years from now? We are evolving as a species, not just in the evolutionary sense of we're evolving as humans, but in an energetic way, we continue to evolve. And so we are all linked together, whether it's a cell, a human, a plant, or the universe, because we're really all energy. We're an energetic phenomenon in a human body. E equals mc squared. Energy equals mass times the speed of light. Energy is mass. We're mass. We're nothing but energy. And we are part of the universe. And we're connected to the universe. And we're connected to each other. Not in this physical sense, but in the conscious sense, in the energetic sense. So a lot of people, we talk about 5 senses, taste, smell, sight, touch, etc. But there are people who have a 6th sense or a 7th sense, and we all have it. We can sense when we're around someone who energetically doesn't get along with us, not the same vibe. I talk about patients who, you have patients you love to see because they have great energy. But then there's other patients, it's going to suck the life right out of you. I call them the black holes of happiness, because they literally,
I know a few of those. Yeah.
They literally suck the energy right out of you.
Yeah.
And we can't quantify that. We can't measure that, but we know intuitively that it's there. So we are all part of this giant universe. And the whole thing about mind, body, and the power of belief is we restrict ourselves from what we can do because of all the negative beliefs that are instilled to us as a child or even as an adult. You can't. Think of how many times people say, don't do that, or you can't do that, when we really should be telling children or anybody, you can literally do anything you want to do if you truly believe that you can do that.
Right. Well, tell this or share this story, which was an eye-opener for me, but it's undoubtedly true. And that is the stress factor. And you tell the story about the tiger, when you had to run from it, and it was a learning experience, but it was over with. That was a threat to your life, but it didn't last. Now, in the modern age, we don't have these threats to our lives, but we tend to carry the fear long term.
Yeah, so if we look at the stress response, that is a physiologic response that's built into our system. And it has evolutionary advantages, because if you were a hunter-gatherer 5,000 years ago and a wild animal ate your cousin, that experience sticks in your mind like, oh, next time I see that, I better move out of the way. And again, like you said, it's over in about 10 or 15 minutes. Now, in today's society, most thoughts that we're afraid of are just thoughts. They're never, ever going to affect our physical self. And so what we do is we continually ruminate on these negative thoughts, which are perpetuated by people in your life, the news. I use the news as a classic example. It's fear-based. If you listen to Fox News, you think the world's going to end every day. And so what happens is your body can't differentiate from a real threat or a perceived threat through thought. So if we continue to ruminate on these negative thoughts and we continue to put out that negative energy, we provoke that stress response in our bodies. So we're constantly under stress. And we worry about the future. How is my kid going to get into Harvard? How am I going to pay the bills next month? How am I going to continue to live with this husband that treats me poorly? And we ruminate about the past. Could have, should have, would have, which you can do nothing about, right? You can do nothing about the past. You cannot predict the future. And so we miss the present moment. And the present moment is the here and now. And there's no stress associated with that because you're just living that present moment. So as I sit here with you, I'm completely absorbed in this present moment. I'm not worried about tomorrow. I'm not worried about yesterday. I'm completely relaxed.
Well, so am I. I'm glad of it. Well, I maybe we should have started this way because I was so off base on this, but I was really amazed by the statistic that you cited. When it comes to these chronic diseases, the things that kill us, 2% are genome DNA related, and most of these things are environmentally caused.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if we look at, we talk about DNA, we talk about genetic mutations, and we all are born with certain minor genetic mutations. None of us have the exact same DNA. But there's only a very small number of diseases that are a genetically produced disease, meaning there's been a single genetic mutation that causes that disease. So sickle cell disease is one. Tay-Sachs disease is another.
My sister died of ALS. Where would it fall in that?
We don't know. ALS
okay.
is not a genetically transmitted disease as like sickle cell disease.
Oh, okay.
So very, very few diseases are actually single gene mutations that transmit disease. Cystic fibrosis is another one. Most disease is because of our environment. And most disease is associated with expression or non-expressions of certain genes. So you could be predisposed to diabetes because of genetic mutations in the genome of your family. Dad had diabetes, grandpa had diabetes, great-grandpa had diabetes. You probably have a predisposition to that disease. But the thing is, you're not necessarily destined to get it. What happens is people, and I really believe this, people believe like, oh, my whole family had cancer, I'm going to get cancer.
Yeah.
You know what? You probably are. You probably are.
If you think, yeah.
If you think
Yeah.
that, you probably will end up with that. And there's this brain of ours has this very, very powerful influence over genetic expression, and we're just beginning to explore that realm.
Well, then talk a little bit about this difference in the way that you practitioners view medicine today. The old Newtonian linear way of looking at things, as opposed to what we were talking about a little bit earlier. This quantum physics thing where and proximity, and you don't even have to be directly. That's a pretty cool premise. But it's a little beyond me. See if you can explain it in the base layman terms a guy like me can get.
So, Newtonian physics. So, Isaac Newton, there's no doubt about it. He was a genius. He came up with many irrefutable laws of physics, laws of thermodynamics, gravity. But we have developed medicine in a Newtonian world where A plus B equals C, or A influences B influences C. So, it's very linear. So, for example, I use depression as sort of my model. If you're depressed, I give you a medicine that changes one chemical in your body, serotonin. And I say, oh, this will cure or help your depression. Well, that works great in a Newtonian world of A to B to C. It doesn't work in a quantum world. And we live in a quantum world. I mean, this has been known for 100 years. The quantum physicists, the Einsteins, the Niels Bohrs, the Heisenbergs, all these great physicists understand that it's not as simple as A to B to C. So if I have depression, if I give myself something that changes the serotonin, many times that's not enough because depression is multifactorial. It's not just if I change B, then C will happen. C may change because I changed A or D or E or C, whatever it is. And so there's multiple influences upon any disease state. And Western medicine is, we develop a drug, it changes one thing in the body, and we expect everything to get better. But as we talked about in the talk, if you look at TV commercials and you have a drug,
oh God, yeah.
What takes more time than anything to explain about that drug?
The guy talks fast at the end about the side effects.
The side effects. Yeah. So if we change one chemical in one part of your body, that chemical is throughout your body, and it interacts with many other chemicals in a quantum fashion. And so we get this cascade of things we don't want. And that's the problem with Western medicine. We can't fix everything with a single drug or a single chemical. We are marvelous, intricate, complicated, not only biochemical, but energetic machines. And so we have to really look at it as what is actually going on in your environment that's causing a disease. So in Western medicine, you come in and you have a headache and we say, oh, take ibuprofen. Well, why did you get that headache? Why are we not manipulating and figuring out the cause of the headache as opposed to just treating the symptom? You might have a headache every day because of the way you sit at work. Oh, that's a simple biomechanical problem. Mm-hmm. You might have a headache because it might go back to childhood, the way you were treated by your parents or a neighbor or another kid. It's amazing by looking back at people's histories and looking back not only their own history, but parental history or grandparent history, how that can literally influence gene expression in us. It can be passed from generation to generation. It's called epigenetics, which means above genetics, which means environmental influences change the expression of genes.
I think we're figuring some of this stuff out, like you say, Einstein 100 years ago, and I suppose we're still kind of like I use the example of ants looking at a dump truck, but I think we're figuring it out somewhat. And when it comes to molecules and cell structure, that effect of proximity, it's been proven in plants, I think I've heard, where you can put a plant in a vacuum isolated circumstance and do something to it, and it affects a plant that is not in proximity. Okay. So, and it's the same way with humans.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they've done that. There was an experiment done out in California by Victor Chabot, and he took nerve cells, and he put a set of nerve cells in a sealed container, sealed from everything, took another set of nerve cells outside that container, stimulated the nerve cells outside the container, and the ones inside responded.
Yeah.
Non-linear association. So we have a response that happens without proximity. And that's a quantum physics principle. It's called non-locality. So non-locality means if I do something here, I may see a response in the universe thousands of miles away. And they've shown this in identical twins, actually. There's really an interesting book. It's by a guy by the name of Larry Dossey. It's called One Mind. And it's about the fact that we are all one mind, one consciousness on this earth. And they use identical twins. And they've shown multiple times if an identical twin has an injury, the other identical twin feels it in some way. Non-locality. And they can be thousands of miles apart. Yeah, there's weird stuff in the quantum world. Non-locality is one of them.
And so you can... And I use this example. There's a big, tough hockey guy that I follow. I watch his broadcast, Mickey Redmond with the Detroit Red Wings. He's a color commentator. Well, this guy, he will not tolerate or accept anybody talking anything negatively about his cancer or anybody around him. He believes it's that important, the positive nature of this. I mean, the positive waves. I mean, it's got to be positive. Don't be negative because they can have an adverse effect. So when you're talking about yourself, that can be true. But if you apply the quantum physics thing to it, I can actually harm you by being a negative, a negative Nelly, so to speak. And would it be the same thing true about your disease or the potential for disease?
I think absolutely true. Now, here's the problem. We're in Western medicine. We can't measure those things yet, so we therefore say they don't exist. But they do exist. We're not smart enough to figure out how to actually measure it. Someday we will. So let's use an example. 100 years ago, we didn't know the heart had an electrical system because we couldn't measure an EKG. Well, now we measure EKGs. We know the heart has an electrical system. So it's always been there, but it only existed when we could see it or measure it. And I think the same thing with these energetic phenomena and these vibrational phenomena. We can't really measure it, but it exists. That's the basis behind energy healing, behind vibrational therapy, sound therapy. All these things work with the energies in our bodies. So yes, if I put out negative thoughts into the universe, then those negative thoughts probably do have an effect somewhere. Back in the 1970s, there was an experiment done, and they took 3,000 people, I think it was 3,000, and they meditated every day for love and peace within the entire universe. And then what they did is they measured crime rates before and after all these people around the world meditated. And trying to get rid of all the other confounding variables, what they found was crime went down by 16% and terrorism activities actually went down by 74%. Now, you can believe it, you can take it for whatever it's worth, but there's an energetic phenomenon that if we all had a positive attitude of we can do this, we can solve that, we could be so much better. If it would just be a universe of love and we had no hate, we had no jealousy, we had no distrust, guess what? We don't have to worry about mass shootings.
Yeah.
We don't have to worry about all these catastrophes that happen. So we have that power. We are incredibly powerful creatures.
Yeah. That's great. A practitioner, somebody like you, how do you balance the two? Or what's the ratio that you tend to look? Because you still got to take the drugs. You got to do the chemotherapy with certain cancers and, the
Sure.
treatments that you have, the regimen, I guess you would call it. Well, how do you balance that then with the part of it, the positive thinking, the nutritional elements of it? I mean, what do you advise people?
So, this is interesting because I am in a transition from this traditional view to this more holistic view. And so I straddle both sides of this fence, the traditional side and then the more holistic, or what some people would say is woo-woo side. And what I advise patients is in 2019, this is how we know how to treat cancer. Now, how can we improve your chances of survival using some of these techniques? And one of the big ones is you have to have a belief system that what you and your doctor are doing for your cancer is absolutely going to work. And I'm going to use my father as an example. So my father, he's 89 years old in a couple months. At 85, he was discovered to have a stage 3 colon cancer. That means he had a cancer in his colon that went to the lymph nodes around the colon.
That sounds bad.
So you have surgery. 5-year survival rate's about 67%. If you have chemotherapy after that, you can bump your 5-year survival rate to almost 80%. So at 85, he had the surgery. He chose to do chemo. And the chemo is it's 12 rounds of chemo. It's associated with side effects, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, tingling and numbness in your fingers and toes. And he marched through that chemotherapy. And I said, Dad, don't you just dread going to chemotherapy? He goes, no, I love going. Because number one, I know it's one more down. And number two, I know that stuff is working to kill the cells. So now he's 4 years out, not a hint of cancer. It was his belief. And so I think for patients with cancer, the most important thing is that they believe in their physician and that they believe in the treatment they're getting. And I had another patient I dealt with, and his physician gave him a drug and said, there's only about a 10% chance this is going to work. Of course, it didn't work because he goes, I knew it wouldn't work. So it really is about how we interact with our patients. And there is an art to medicine. It's not as simple as a robot giving you a drug. It's really about the empathy that physician displays towards you. It's about how you connect with that person. I was just dealing with another patient. He went to MD Anderson, the mecca for cancer. Got 4 weeks of chemotherapy. His tumor grew right through it. He hated MD Anderson. He goes, they were impersonal. Nobody explained anything. I knew it wouldn't work. He knew it wouldn't work. I said to him, if you had a provider that you clicked with and you knew that guy was doing everything in his power to do, I bet your chemotherapy would have worked. Belief, the power of belief. So I really want people you can go to the best cancer center in the world, and if you don't really believe that what they're doing for you is in your best interest, is actually going to help you, it probably isn't.
I was just in a hockey tournament this past weekend. It was called Pucks for Parkinson's. They were raising money for it. And they told me about a guy that was playing, and I hear this all the time. They discovered a tumor in his brain or the back of his brain or something. They were explaining it to me. And then you get this story where they said, and the doctor told him he only had 2 years to live. And I'm thinking, you're just hearing this from the patient, maybe third hand, actually from somebody else. Would a cancer doctor tell somebody that? That doesn't sound reasonable or realistic to me. How are people repeating those stories? What is that all about?
That happens all the time.
It does.
Yeah. Because and I always, I don't tell them how long they're going to have to live unless they ask me the question. And I never tell them, oh, you're going to live X number of years. Because the way we derive statistics for life expectancy is we look at thousands and thousands of people. And we say, yep, this is the average amount somebody with your disease in your stage is going to live. Well, that's silliness because everybody's different. And so if somebody asks me that question, I say, these are averages, but you don't have to fall in these averages. You can be way out here. It's just, how do you believe we're going to help you and treat your cancer?
And the best way to beat cancer probably is to try to prevent it through this better lifestyle and approach to living, which is what your big advocacy is.
Yeah,
obviously.
Absolutely. I mean, this is, we spend billions upon billions of dollars looking for a, quote, cure for cancer. Yet less than 5% of all research dollars is spent on prevention. So if you look at cancers, probably 60 to even maybe 70% of cancers are preventable. 1/3 of cancers are tobacco related. So if we got rid of all tobacco,
take that off, yeah,
1/3 of cancers go away.
Yeah.
Everybody's familiar with lung cancer. Now, only 10 to 15% of smokers actually get lung cancer. But lung cancer is the number one cancer killer in this country, both men and women. We get rid of throat cancers. We get rid of we decrease esophageal cancer, bladder cancer, colon cancer. All these go down. The other big contributing factor, obesity. There's about 13 different cancers related to being overweight or obese. If we were all metabolically normal and thin, another 30% of cancers go away without chemotherapy, just by lifestyle intervention. And it's not, George, it's not just as simple as, oh, go on a better diet. It's really about how you perceive yourself as a human being. And so we all come into this world with subconscious programming, and we talked about that at the Above and Beyond. 95% of our behavior comes from our subconscious. It's sort of the reactive behavior. Some guy pulls out in front of you in a car and you're mad. Well, that was pre-programmed by your parents, probably. Yeah. You probably saw your parents do it. And I give an example of that in my talk. When I was a little kid, if I spilled milk or a drink, my mom got really mad. I mean, I'd get spanked. Guess what happens when my kids spilled milk? Dad got really mad. Yeah. That was a subconscious stimulus response behavior. I didn't even think about it. I just got mad. Well, why would I get mad at my child, who I love, who accidentally spilled milk? It makes no sense, does it? But that was programmed into my conscious. Now, I got rid of that. I did it through meditation. So I had to deliberately meditate on not doing that for days and days and days. It's not as simple as, we talked about positive thoughts. it's not as simple as having a positive thought. We actually have to reprogram our subconscious. And to do that, we have to look back at our history of why our subconscious is programmed the way it is. So it's really hard work, but boy, in the end, it pays off dividends.
Well, that's great stuff. We've just touched on a lot of these different areas, and we're just about out of time for this podcast. As a matter of fact, we're half an hour into it. So here's the way I'm going to leave this. I'm going to put this up. I'm going to let people know whatever element of this you're most interested in that you would like to hear more about. We'll come back at some later date and talk to Dr. Nish about that specific area, because we did talk about a lot of things today, everything from string theory to, diabetes to, well, there's so many different things involved here that we can't touch on them all in 1.5 hour podcast. So we're going to leave it there. Thanks for being on the podcast. We'll come back soon, I promise, and we'll find out what people are most interested in hearing about, and we'll quiz you just on those things. That's Dr. Andrew Nish, and he is medical director of the John Stoddard Cancer Center here in Des Moines, Iowa, and you've been listening to another podcast by George.
Thanks, George.
Yeah, thanks, Doc.